Now it's gods vs. mortals, but I'm more focused on Midas. Trapped in the confined cells of the underworld, Midas is a prisoner of Hades, and the rest of his gang from Chapter 2 has reunited after 4 years to rescue him. The story begins with Marigold getting them all back together while Midas was slowly plotting his escape. As 2 guards entered his cell, he kicks his plan into action, turning them to solid gold before melting the chains. Finally, he has reclaimed his freedom, but while all this is happening, they discover someone closest to him may be a traitor. He begins to suspect one of his own and decides that Brutus is acting strange. He took charge of the group after Midas' disappearance, and this is when he discovers recording devices in the yacht along with missing piles of money. So he begins to test Brutus' loyalty and finds out that the devices belong to Hope, proving he was not only innocent but the most loyal member of the crew all along. With the reunion complete, they take over the yacht and set sail for a new beginning. All of this was hiding in the background of Season 2, and it made me realize this isn't the first time Fortnite created a secret storyline. At the beginning of Chapter 5, Peely was kidnapped by a mysterious group known as the Society. They held him for ransom to get information on Pandora's box, but Peely's best friend Agent Jones couldn't help them. Instead, he went on a rescue mission that would stop at nothing to save his friend. Anyone who tried to equip Peely in their locker actually saw he was replaced by a missing poster. But this wasn't so bad. In fact, I don't think Peely even knew what was happening. Loading screens released over the season showed him having a blast. While Jones was demanding his release on the phone, he was simply tied to a chair with a smile on his face. He even thought he found a new group of friends and was popping Flowberry champagne. At this point, they were getting sick of him until finally, when players had moved on from the story, one last loading screen dropped, the Great Peely Rescue. There's nothing more romantic than Valentine's Day, and one year we got to make it extra wholesome with a secret storyline. Players had to set up a dining table, get flowers, and prepare fish stick for a date. Then, once everything was ready, we looked at the table only to find Leviathan waiting for him. Super adorable considering they're both fish, but I'm guessing this ended in heartbreak because Fish Stick was later seen holding hands with Doggo in multiple trailers. Since then, the pair have appeared in loading screens together, even co-owning an apartment in Mega City. Now, some characters are still in danger. At the start of Chapter 4, we were introduced to a mysterious group known as the High Stakes Club. In reality, it was a bunch of high schoolers who were best friends, except they also hunted vampires on the side. They spent their time tracking down and slicing up anyone they could find, with Joni the Red wiping out driftwalkers just for fun. Obviously, they're teenagers, so they have other hobbies like music. The whole team loves a singer known as Starfang, except her real name is Countess Daraku, a blood-hungry vampire who preys on her own fans. One night during a concert, she spots the High Stakes Club enjoying the time of their lives. They meet her and share their stories about how much they love her. So Daraku invites them along for round 2 as the club dresses for the occasion. Except they're walking into a trap as Starfang reveals her true form, a vampire thirsty for blood. They survive, but they're traumatized by what happened. Some of the members even doubt they can be vampire hunters anymore. It would be too hard to kill their biggest idol. That's until they encounter a fellow hunter known as Victoria Sane, but she notices these kids need a mentor. So she trains and teaches them to become experts as they prepare to face the Countess. They build shotguns filled with wooden stakes and finally confront Starfang. After a tough battle, they beat her, stopping the evil reign of terror. It is crazy to think entire stories are hidden in quests and crew packs, but it was even harder to track down the adorable faces of the Coral Buddies. Originally, these tiny guys were on a beach in Chapter 2, and they had a totally secret quest line that never appeared in challenges. At first, they'd live in a small village, and you could give them 100 wood, allowing their society to evolve. When we returned a couple weeks later, they had expanded to the Stone Age, and all we needed to do was give them brick to complete the monument. Boom, they built the pyramids. Just like that, we taught Coral Buddies stone crafting, and this was already the beginning of the end for their society. Within weeks, we returned to find entire buildings, a whole city, and around the corner, a launch site. Yeah, the Coral Buddies had started their own space program, and with just a little bit of metal, we could help them achieve this. They had done it, journeying into outer space. A nice happy ending for the Coral Buddies. A cool insight into civilization, right? Well, that's until one final quest appeared, asking us to collect a nuclear container and bring it to the test site. Oh boy. As we completed the secret challenge, it was time to begin an atomic test. They even wore eye protection goggles like Oppenheimer. At first, it looked like the test went smoothly, a successful mushroom cloud, except when we returned, their entire city was wiped out. Fortnite themselves said, oh no, debris was scattered everywhere, and the survivors became mutant cyborgs. Now sure, they might have been wiped out, but they never went extinct. Years later, they've appeared in some seasons, with the latest being Chapter 5, where the Coral Buddies are secretly hiding out in a cave. They're doing some pretty weird stuff in here, like kidnapping gnomes and visiting the top of Mount Olympus' statue. I can't believe this whole questline was never even included in the challenge list. It was completely hidden. A secret you probably weren't expecting involves these frog statues. These guys have been around for a couple chapters now, but they have always just been a decoration on the map. We land somewhere only to find a group of frogs presenting like 4 chests to us. Pretty cool way to put loot in the middle of a forest, but that's all it was. Until Chapter 5, when the frog statues were nowhere to be found. Players thought they had disappeared until they went to Lovely Lodge, the only place on the map where they'll appear, and guess what? They're getting married. Another loyal pair are the scientist and his robot assistant, Amy. When the 7 were still part of the storyline, scientists built Amy to help with tasks, and after they got swallowed up by Chrome, she was determined to get him back. Amy would spend the next season coming up with an insane plan. Back in Chapter 3, she once mentioned that she would love to have a real body rather than a computer on a phone. And now the scientist was missing, it was the perfect time to do this. So she began to do tests on the Riftgate, making his help as she discovered it could take her straight to the 7. However, they were running out of time as they changed and took on new forms under the power of Chrome. Amy had to act fast, finally building a mechanical suit for herself, which was secretly revealed in this loading screen. In a rush, she clearly used the robot body of AIM from Chapter 1 and dived into the gate. This mini story is crazy because it's still going. Most of the hidden stories in this video have amazing endings, while Amy's journey still remains a complete mystery. Will she save them or become Chrome as well? Now there's a side story that felt small, only to be crucial to a live event months later. During Chapter 3, Fortnite added a fun little quest line where we had to help Peely learn how to drive. Seemed really desperate for some reason, but we went along with it anyway. Each lesson, we would teach him to fill up a car, drive around, and finally show him how to cross a bridge. Pretty simple, until we came back a few weeks later and discovered Peely crashed an ice cream truck. So he got new lessons, this time driving a bus, only for that to also end terribly. He then decides he wants to drive something even bigger. We could find him eyeing up a truck and preparing to take it over. This was the last we heard of him, as the Collision Live event took most of our attention, only for something incredible to happen midway through.
Oh, I trained him to drive! We trained him to drive!
Power to emergency recovery system.
No one could have guessed this tiny side quest would become so important. Players who helped them all the way got this loading screen in memory of it. Speaking of surprising outcomes, back in Chapter 1, there's a photo at a grave of a bride. No one knew who this was and assumed it was taken from another game, was just concept art, or ripped from Save the World. Well, it wasn't until years later that we opened up Fortnite Mirrors and found a terrifying secret at a cabin. Willow, a horrifying doll-faced spirit, would chase us around with an axe, desperately trying to kill us. It was pretty scary, but even then we didn't connect the dots. Finally, 1 year later, we returned to the OG map along with the photo, the same one from 2018 showing a bride with her favorite doll, Willow. Not only was she teased long before her release, but it confirmed she was a dead bride who possessed a doll trapped on a mission for vengeance. Her description even said she's a wandering spirit with unfinished business. This mystery was years in the making. Speaking of Chapter 1 secrets, when we returned in 2018 to Fortnite OG, it felt like a simpler time. Although that didn't stop Epic from adding secret storylines. Turns out, even when Peely isn't driving, he still causes accidents. Agent Jones was transporting the time machine to get us back home, driving it towards the rocket for the Big Bang event. Except, he slipped on a banana peel. Yeah, it sent him flying off the road through a cabbage stand and into Loot Lake. He had to drag the time machine into a trailer and then camp overnight here before wheeling it up to Dusty Divot. Most players just assumed the Big Bang event happened by itself, but this was all happening in the background. Just like one of my favorite side stories that no one ever talks about. At the start of Chapter 2, there was a house on the beach called Fancy View. It was a pretty nice mansion, they even had a sports car overlooking the sea, but if you've seen Ferris Bueller, you probably could have guessed this would end badly. Over the coming weeks, we would visit this place and find the car totaled after falling off the cliff. At first, this was an amazing reference to the film, but as we kept returning, more stuff was going on. A crane appeared at the house, trying to lift up the car and salvage it, only for the crane to be dragged down too, leaving a huge crash site at the bottom. So the natural solution was to get an even bigger crane to lift that one. As it pulled up the wreckage, guess what? Deja vu struck as that one also fell down the cliff. The secret storyline happened over the course of 5 seasons, all for a movie reference. You love to see it. Speaking of underrated locations, throughout Chapter 4, we had the emergence of a new restaurant, Thunder's sushi place Gila. As you might know, Thunder is a very talented sushi chef who is so iconic, he even has his own theme song. His backstory also revealed that he would hold parties here along with special menu items. And while you might think his story ended in Chapter 4, he continues to thrive, opening 2 new locations on the Chapter 5 map. Hopefully it's insured. Turns out that's a big part of Fortnite's island that no one really talks about. No Sweat Insurance is one of the most important companies on the map, and they've been lurking in the shadows for over half a decade. These guys insure people on the island from natural disasters, live events, threats from outer space. It's surprisingly common in Fortnite, and the underwriter is the main guy to help you out. Of course, he'll do whatever it takes to avoid insurance payouts, even if it means saving everyone's houses. During the Chrome season, it began to spread around the island, threatening anyone in the area. So, No Sweat decided to build custom floating platforms and only offered it to houses that were insured. This saved them from being damaged, and in turn saved No Sweat from paying a ton of money. The devs made this hidden story so in-depth, which is incredible when you consider 99% of players don't even know about it. And yeah, I mentioned how they've been around way longer than we realize. It all has to do with this classic building from Tilted Towers. It's one of the very first secret stories in Fortnite, and this thing was originally hit by a meteor in Season 4, causing it to collapse and leave a crater. So the city rebuilt it. Proud of their achievement, we couldn't wait to see the fresh version, only for Kevin to roll into Tilted and crush the new building. This time they learned from their mistake, adding upgrades and support beams, but it wasn't enough. It took an entire season to rebuild it, only for an earthquake to strike 2 weeks later. At this point, players are finally catching on to the joke, realizing the building was cursed. When it came back yet again, it had a total redesign and now under the ownership of a company known as No Sweat Insurance. I don't know what they did this time around, but when another disaster struck, turning the entire city to rubble, the only thing left standing here was No Sweat Insurance. The curse had finally been lifted, making this one of the most memorable side stories in Fortnite. And that brings me to the most iconic rivalry in Fortnite. Battle Royales existed for a long time, and during that whole period, we've had 2 species at war for domination of the island. While we were busy fighting each other, most people never looked at the gnomes and teddy bears. These guys have spent so much time planning battles, kidnapping each other, and signing peace treaties that breaking it all down could be its own video. The war truly had its ups and downs. At one point, you can see the gnomes and bears on a hill about to fire cannons at each other, only for them to be on dinner dates later on. Some gnomes even broke away from the group, such as this evil one, a scientist who created a super slurp juice. It went terribly wrong, causing him to become a cyborg supervillain. At one point, he booby-trapped areas where fellow gnomes were meeting, hoping to blow them up with his super serum. We had to step in and disarm the traps before the evil gnome revealed his biggest plan yet. He went to Slurpy Swamp plotting to destroy the world, but before he could pollute it, we managed to foil his evil scheme. He desperately fled in an escape attempt, and we didn't hear much from the cyborg after this. A couple weeks later, a secret update dropped as players went back to Slurpy and found a memorial. Here, we could pay our respects to the failed supervillain. Rest in peace, little guy.